You know how sometimes life just hits you? Not a gentle tap, not a playful nudge, but a full-on, unannounced, brass-knuckled punch to the gut that leaves you gasping for air in the middle of a perfectly ordinary Tuesday? Yeah, that was my year. That was the year I learned that the most dangerous monsters don't hide under your bed, they sleep right beside you, whispering sweet nothings, while they meticulously plan to torch your entire world. And the most terrifying part? For the longest time I was holding the match. It all started, as these things often do, with a whirlwind. His name was Leo. And cliché as it sounds, he walked into my life like a perfectly curated TikTok montage, sun-kissed hair, a laugh that could disarm a bomb, and eyes that saw me, truly saw me, in a way no one ever had. Or so I thought. I was 28, fresh off a truly soul-crushing breakup that had left me feeling like a deflated balloon animal, convinced my heart was permanently laminated with a do not bend sign. My apartment, a cozy but slightly cluttered two-bedroom in the trendy part of the city, felt less like a home and more like a carefully constructed sarcophagus for my single existence. My days were a predictable rhythm of work. I was a senior project manager at a mid-sized tech firm, stable, decent pay, utterly uninspired, solitary evenings with bad Netflix, and the occasional forced brunch with friends who meant well but mostly just reminded me how spectacularly single I was. I'd grown comfortable in my cocoon of routine, believing that comfort equaled safety, and safety meant avoiding any further heartbreak. I'd built walls so high, even Rapunzel would have struggled. But Leo? Leo didn't just climb them, he seemed to glide over them, effortlessly, like a warm breeze carrying the scent of possibility. He was a freelance graphic designer, always buzzing with new ideas, perpetually sketching in a worn leather notebook, talking about manifesting and synergy and all those words that, coming from him, didn't sound like corporate jargon but like genuine passion. He was charming, yes, almost annoyingly so, but it felt authentic. He was kind, attentive, remembered the little things, the way I took my coffee, the obscure band I loved, the tiny scar above my left eyebrow that I usually covered with makeup. He listened, really listened, with an intensity that made me feel like the most fascinating person on the planet. He'd bring me random wildflowers, leave absurdly sweet notes on my fridge, cook me elaborate, and surprisingly delicious, meals just because it was Tuesday. He made me laugh until my stomach hurt, that deep, uninhibited laugh I hadn't felt since I was a teenager. He talked about the future, our future, with such certainty, such vivid detail, that I started to believe in it too. A little house with a big garden, a rescue dog, late-night talks under a sky full of stars. He saw a version of me that was brave, adventurous, desirable, a stark contrast to the small, timid person I felt I'd become. He was everything I thought I wanted, everything I secretly craved after years of being overlooked. He wasn't just charming, he was a mirror reflecting back the most beautiful version of myself, a version I hadn't known existed. And God, I fell. Hard. Fast. Recklessly. I dismantled my walls brick by painful brick, not realizing I was just clearing the ground for the explosives. He said he loved me first, of course. Murmured it against my hair one quiet evening, the words soft as a lullaby. It felt like coming home. I was finally, utterly, completely seen. Or so I believed. He talked about our shared future, the Leo and Clara brand, the life we'd build. It wasn't just talk, he drew little blueprints of our dream house, meticulously planned hypothetical trips, even researched obscure local customs of places we might visit someday. It was intoxicating, this shared vision, this feeling of being on a team, building something beautiful and lasting together. We moved in together after 6 months. My friends, ever cautious, raised eyebrows. "Isn't that a bit fast, Clara?" they'd ask, their voices laced with concern I dismissed as jealousy or an inability to grasp true love. "When you know, I'd gush, parroting the exact sentiment Leo had whispered to me countless times. Our apartment, once my solitary refuge, transformed into a vibrant, laughter-filled space. His art supplies sprawled across the dining table, his eclectic music taste blending seamlessly with my pop playlists. We spent weekends exploring local markets, hiking trails, discovering hole-in-the-wall cafes. He'd often forget his wallet, or his card would mysteriously decline, and I, ever the practical one, would simply cover it. "Don't worry, babe, I'll get you back," he'd say, flashing that blinding smile, and I never doubted him. He was a freelance artist, after all, money ebbed and flowed. I was stable, comfortable. It felt right to support him, to be his rock, his steady ground while he chased his artistic dreams. He was the visionary, the artist, and I was the pragmatic one, anchoring him. It felt like a symbiotic relationship, a perfect balance. He'd often tell me how lucky he was to have me, how I was his muse, his strength, his anchor. And those words, those quiet affirmations, were like a balm to the insecurities that still lingered from my past. He made me feel valued, necessary, adored. He made me believe I was truly special. I remember the first crack, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, like a hairline fracture in an otherwise flawless vase. We were at a friend's casual dinner party, and the conversation drifted to careers. Someone asked Leo about his latest freelance project. He launched into an animated description, gesturing wildly, captivating the small audience. And then, he mentioned a particularly challenging client, sighing dramatically, "Oh, if it weren't for Clara, I swear I'd have lost my mind. She's so good at all the boring, logical stuff, sorting out my contracts, reminding me to send invoices, basically being my human alarm clock for deadlines." Everyone chuckled, and he squeezed my hand, a loving gesture. But something in the way he said boring, logical stuff, something in the almost dismissive wave of his hand, made a tiny, unidentifiable part of me bristle. I, the senior project manager, the one who meticulously managed million-dollar accounts and dozens of people, was suddenly reduced to his glorified personal assistant, his human alarm clock. I brushed it off, of course. He's just being sweet, I told myself, forcing a smile. He appreciates your help. He was just being Leo, charming and a little dramatic, painting me as the grounded one to his free spirit. It was endearing, wasn't it? Another instance that pricked at me, though again, I buried it under layers of rationalization, was when I suggested we look into a joint savings account. We were talking about a future trip, and I was always the one saving, budgeting, making sure we had a cushion. He laughed, a little too loud, and ruffled my hair. "Oh, my practical Clara. Always thinking about the numbers. But babe, money comes and goes. We're young, we're living. What's the point of hoarding it? Let's just enjoy it, live in the moment." He had a way of making my sensible suggestions sound utterly joyless, like I was trying to suck the fun out of life. He spun it beautifully, of course, talking about experiences over possessions, freedom over financial burdens. And because he said it with such conviction, with that disarming smile, I started to believe that maybe I was too rigid, too focused on the mundane. Maybe I should loosen up, live a little. After all, wasn't that part of the charm of being with an artist, someone who saw the world through a different, more vibrant lens? He started borrowing small sums more frequently after that. Just until this big client pays, he'd promise, or my old laptop just died, need a new one for work, you know? Always for work, always for a legitimate, understandable reason. And always with the promise of repayment, though that repayment rarely materialized. I kept a mental tally, at first. A few hundred here, 1,000 there. It added up. But when I gently brought it up, he'd get this wounded look in his eyes. "Clara, do you not trust me? After everything? I thought we were partners. Is it really about a few $100? I'd do anything for you." And just like that, I was the villain, the one questioning our sacred bond over something as trivial as money. He made me feel petty, small-minded, distrustful. He was a master at turning the tables, at making me question my own perceptions. It was gaslighting, pure and simple, but I didn't have the vocabulary for it then. I just felt a knot of guilt in my stomach and quickly apologized, assuring him of my unwavering faith. "Of course, I trust you," I'd say, feeling a pang of self-reproach. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean anything by it." He'd pull me into a tight hug, kiss the top of my head, and everything would feel right again, the fleeting moment of doubt vanishing like smoke. He had this incredible ability to smooth over any discomfort, to make me feel like I was imagining things. He'd say, "You're overthinking it, babe. Relax. We're good. We are good." And I desperately wanted to believe him. I needed to. The business idea solidified over late-night talks, fueled by cheap wine and ambitious dreams. A coffee shop, but more than that, a community hub, a small gallery for local artists, a cozy space for open mic nights and poetry readings. The perennial bean, he called it, sketching logos on napkins, his eyes alight with a fervor I found irresistible. He was passionate, electric, and I, the pragmatic one, saw the potential. My background in project management, my meticulous planning skills, combined with his artistic vision, it felt like a dream team. I had a significant amount saved, a nest egg for a down payment on a place, accumulated over years of disciplined saving. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was enough to make a substantial dent in a small business venture. He had ideas. And charm. And promises of investors who were just about to sign. I, in my naive enthusiasm, offered to put in the bulk of the initial capital. "It's an investment in us, Leo," I'd said, my heart swelling with the romance of it all. He'd hugged me tight, called me his angel, his savior. "We'll build this empire together, Clara. You and me against the world." He insisted on handling all the legal paperwork, the permits, the contractor negotiations. "Babe, you're swamped with work, and honestly, this stuff is a headache. You focus on the big picture, the marketing, making sure we have the best coffee beans. I'll handle the boring details. You trust me, right?" His voice held that subtle edge, that familiar tone that made any hesitation feel like a personal affront. And of course, I trusted him. Blindly. Completely. He'd show me snippets of emails, photos of potential locations, even mock-ups of the interior design, all carefully curated to keep me enthusiastic and, crucially, distracted. "The lease is almost finalized," he'd say, "or just waiting on this last permit." He was a master of vague progress reports, always just on the cusp of a breakthrough. I'd ask to see the full lease agreement, or the financials, and he'd brush me off. "It's all boilerplate, sweetheart. My lawyer's reviewing it. You wouldn't understand all the legal jargon anyway. Trust me, it's solid." And again, that insidious jab, the subtle implication that I, with my boring, logical mind, wasn't sophisticated enough to grasp the complexities. I ignored the whispers of doubt, the tiny voice in the back of my head that kept asking for specifics. I was so caught up in the dream, in the idea of us building something real, tangible, together. I poured every spare moment into researching coffee suppliers, creating social media strategies, even designing a loyalty program. My colleagues noticed a change in me. "You seem happier, Clara," my friend Sarah, who sat 2 cubicles down, commented one afternoon. "Like you're finally alive." I was buzzing with purpose, with a shared future that felt so bright, so full of promise. The money felt like a small price to pay for this beautiful dream, this shared adventure with the man I loved. He had a way of making me feel like I was the lucky one, the one who was blessed to be part of his grand vision. He painted a picture of a bustling, vibrant space, our space, where people would gather, create, connect. And I, the quiet, analytical one, would be the silent force behind it all, the the one who made his artistic dreams a reality. It was an irresistible fantasy, one I eagerly invested in, heart and soul, and a substantial portion of my life savings. The closer we got to the supposed grand opening, the more erratic Leo became. He was constantly on his phone, hushed conversations, darting glances when I walked into the room. He'd disappear for hours, claiming urgent meetings with contractors or last-minute supplier issues that needed his immediate attention. When I pressed for details, he'd become agitated, defensive. "Why are you always interrogating me, Clara? Do you really think I'm out here gallivanting when I'm trying to build our future?" The words would sting, making me retreat, apologetic. "No, of course not, I worry. I want to help." But he never seemed to need my help with the important things. Only the things that required my money. The investors he'd vaguely mentioned never materialized, or if they did, he'd dismiss them with a wave of his hand. Oh, that fell through. They weren't aligned with our vision. Each time, it meant I had to dip deeper into my savings. The numbers on my bank app started to dwindle, the buffer I'd meticulously built over years shrinking with alarming speed. I tried to talk to him about it, the anxiety churning in my stomach. "Leo, what about the finances? We're so close to opening, but I'm getting nervous about how much more we can pour into this without a clear return." He'd sigh, exasperated. "Clara, this is a startup. It takes guts, it takes sacrifice. Are you telling me you're not committed? Are you pulling out now, after all we've done?" His voice would rise, just slightly, enough to make me feel small and selfish. He'd remind me of my practicality, implying it was a weakness, not a strength. "You're thinking like a corporate drone, Clara. This is art. This is passion. You can't put a price on that." He twisted my caution into a lack of faith, my sensible questions into an attack on his artistic integrity. And because I so desperately wanted to believe in his vision, in our vision, I silenced the increasingly loud alarms ringing in my head. I wanted to be the supportive partner, the one who believed when no one else did. I wanted to be worthy of his grand dreams. I wanted to be the reason he succeeded. My friends, Sarah especially, started noticing. "You look exhausted, Clara," she'd say, eyeing my drawn face over lukewarm coffee at work. "And you never talk about Leo anymore, just the perennial bean. Are you okay?" I'd nod vaguely, deflect, change the subject. How could I explain the subtle shift, the way his warmth now felt conditional, his affection a reward for my compliance? How could I articulate the growing unease, the feeling that I was sinking deeper into something I couldn't quite grasp? One evening, I casually mentioned wanting to meet the supposed landlord for the final walkthrough. He stiffened. "Oh, he's a busy man, Clara. Very old school. Doesn't like distractions. I'll handle it. It's just a formality." My gut clenched. A formality for our dream? Why was I always excluded from the formalities, the boring details that were, in reality, the crucial foundations of our joint venture? I still didn't confront him directly. I was too afraid of the fight, too afraid of what I might find. Too afraid that admitting my doubts meant admitting I'd been wrong about him, about us. That would shatter the beautiful, fragile world I'd so painstakingly built around Leo. The grand opening date was set, October 27th. A Tuesday. Of course, it was a Tuesday. The week leading up to the grand opening was a blur of frantic activity, mostly on my part. Leo was increasingly absent, citing final inspections and supplier crises. I was left to handle the digital marketing, sending out invitations, hyping up the event on social media, coordinating with local influencers I'd managed to wrangle. I even designed the menu boards and the loyalty cards, spending countless late nights fueled by instant coffee. I was high on adrenaline, running on fumes, but also on a surging wave of excitement. This was it. Our dream. Finally. I'd send out personal invites to all my friends, my family, even some colleagues. I wanted them to see what Leo and I had built, to share in our triumph. I imagined them walking in, seeing the perennial bean in all its glory, and understanding why I'd poured my everything into this. They'd see us. I decided to make the night even more special. I'd been secretly planning a small, personal surprise for Leo, a quiet moment amidst the celebratory chaos. I'd found this vintage silver compass pendant, intricately engraved, symbolizing our shared journey, our true north. I planned to give it to him just before the official ribbon cutting, a private gesture of our unbreakable bond. I rehearsed the words in my head, the little speech about partnership and dreams. It felt profoundly romantic, a testament to everything we'd overcome. The morning of the 27th, I woke with a nervous flutter in my stomach. I spent hours getting ready, choosing a dress I felt beautiful in, doing my hair and makeup with unusual care. I wanted to look my best, not just for the cameras, but for Leo, for us. I felt like a bride walking down the aisle, about to embark on the next glorious chapter of my life. He'd barely been home the night before, claiming he had to oversee last-minute deliveries. He called me that morning, his voice thick with a mix of exhaustion and excitement. "Babe, it's all happening. I'm already at the shop, sorting out a few last things. Can't wait to see you. You're going to be so proud of us." Us. That word echoed in my mind, a comforting refrain. Us. I arrived precisely at 6 p.m., just as the first guests were trickling in. The storefront was indeed transformed. Warm lights glowed from within, a subtle coffee aroma wafted out, and the custom-designed The Perennial Bean sign, Leo's beautiful script, hung proudly above the door. My heart swelled. This was it. My dream. Our dream. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning the room, searching for Leo. The space was beautiful, just as we'd envisioned. Exposed brick, cozy seating nooks, a small stage for the open mic nights. But as my gaze swept across the bustling crowd, a sudden, sharp jolt went through me. My eyes landed on the counter, where Leo stood, not alone, but beside a woman I'd never seen before. She was impossibly glamorous, with fiery red hair and a dazzling smile, her hand resting casually on Leo's arm. And he, Leo, my Leo, was beaming at her, a look of adoration in his eyes that made my blood run cold. They looked like a couple. A new couple. And then I saw it. Above their heads, behind the counter, on the pristine white wall, was a framed certificate. A business license. And below, The Perennial Bean, in bold, elegant script, were two names, Leo Maxwell and Serafina Chen. My breath hitched. Serafina. Not Clara. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The vibrant chatter, the clinking of coffee cups, the soft jazz music, it all became a muffled roar, a distant, distorted sound. My eyes darted from the certificate to Leo, then to the woman, Serafina. She was leaning into him, laughing at something he'd whispered, her hand still intimately placed on his bicep. They looked so natural, so at ease, like they'd been doing this for years. A cold, creeping dread began to spread through my chest, slowly at first, then rapidly, like ice water flooding my veins. It wasn't just the two names on the license. It was the way they looked at each other, the unspoken intimacy in their body language, the shared secret that I was only now stumbling upon. My mind, usually so sharp and analytical, struggled to process it. Serafina Chen. Who is Serafina Chen? My carefully constructed reality, the one built on shared dreams and whispered promises, began to crumble around me. My hand instinctively went to the small, velvet pouch in my purse, where the silver compass pendant lay, a symbol of a bond that was clearly a lie. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. I felt a surge of nausea, a dizzying sense of disorientation. I started walking, propelled by a desperate need for answers. A primal urge to understand what I was seeing. My legs felt heavy, as if moving through thick mud. Each step felt like a betrayal to myself, acknowledging that something truly awful was unfolding. As I got closer to the counter, Leo finally saw me. His smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of something unreadable. Surprise? Annoyance? Recognition? He quickly removed Serafina's hand from his arm, a gesture that was too late, too obvious. "Clara," he called out, his voice a little too loud, a little too forced. "You made it." He tried to sound welcoming, but his eyes darted nervously between me and Serafina. Serafina turned, her smile polite, inquisitive. "Oh, hello," she said, her voice smooth, confident. "Are you a friend of Leo's?" "A friend." The word hung in the air, a cruel, mocking echo. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck, my cheeks burning with humiliation. My friends were starting to arrive, milling about, searching for me. I could feel their eyes on me, their expectant smiles. My carefully chosen dress suddenly felt like a clown costume. I had imagined a triumphant entrance, a shared moment of pride. Instead, I was walking into a nightmare. Leo stepped forward, trying to interpose himself between Serafina and me. "Clara, this is Serafina, my business partner." He stressed the words business partner, almost defensively. Serafina simply raised an eyebrow, a knowing glint in her eyes that sent a fresh wave of panic through me. She clearly knew more than she was letting on. Much, much more. My voice felt trapped in my throat, a dry, choked sound. "Business partner?" I finally managed, the words barely a whisper. What is going on here, Leo?" His jaw tightened. He glanced around the now silent room. My friends had started to notice the tension, their smiles fading into puzzled expressions. This wasn't the triumphant moment I'd envisioned. This was an ambush. And I was the unsuspecting prey. The silence that followed felt deafening, amplifying the frantic beat of my own heart against my ribs. Leo shifted, his gaze flickering between me and the small crowd that was beginning to notice the unusual tension at the counter. Serafina, meanwhile, maintained a perfectly composed, almost pitying expression. "Leo," I repeated, my voice gaining a brittle edge. "What is going on?" He finally met my gaze, but his eyes were cold, distant, devoid of the warmth I had come to associate with him. The mask was slipping, revealing the ugliness beneath. "Clara," he began, his voice lowered, as if trying to shield me from a truth he was about to deliver publicly, "I think we need to talk. Privately." "Privately?" I scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "You think this is a private matter, Leo? After everything? After our money, our dream, our business?" My voice was rising, trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. Heads turned. My friend Sarah, her eyes wide with alarm, started to push through the crowd towards me. Leo's face hardened. He was no longer trying to be gentle. He was cornered, and the charming facade was crumbling under pressure. "There is no our business, Clara," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "This is my business. Serafina and I have been working on this for months." My mind reeled. Months? The last few months, when he'd been telling me it was our future, when he'd been taking my money, when I'd been pouring my soul into marketing our coffee shop. "My money, Leo," I gasped, the words barely audible over the sudden roar in my ears. "What about my investment? What about the thousands I gave you?" He scoffed, a dismissive sound that cut me deeper than any insult. "Your investment? Clara, you loaned me some money. A small loan, for a friend. Nothing more. This was always my vision. You were just helping out." He said helping out like I was a charity case, like my contributions were negligible, an afterthought. Serafina's perfect eyebrows lifted slightly, a smirk playing on her lips. It was clear she was enjoying this. She knew. She knew everything. Alone? I echoed, my voice breaking. The humiliation was a physical weight, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. My friends were closer now, their faces reflecting my own shock. You told me we were partners. You said this was our dream. You took my life savings for this. My voice cracked, tears blurring my vision. Leo took a step back, as if my anguish was an inconvenience. Look, Clara, this isn't working out. You're being irrational. This is a grand opening, not a scene. Frankly, you're making a spectacle of yourself. He gestured vaguely at the growing number of curious onlookers. It's over, okay? We're done. The words hit me like a physical blow. We're done. Here. Now. In front of everyone. The dream, the love, the future, all shattered into a million pieces, publicly, brutally. The compass in my purse felt like a burning coal against my skin. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to rip the smiles off their faces. But I couldn't. I was frozen, exposed, my deepest vulnerabilities laid bare for a crowd of strangers and, worse, my own friends. My cheeks burned with a shame so intense I thought I might actually combust. This wasn't just a breakup, it was an annihilation. The tears came then, hot and stinging, blurring the triumphant smiles of Leo and Serafina, distorting the faces of the curious onlookers into grotesque caricatures. My entire body trembled, not just from anger, but from a profound, bone-deep shock. The sheer audacity, the cold-blooded calculation of it all, was a physical assault. My friends, Sarah and Mark, finally reached me, their faces etched with horror. Sarah wrapped an arm around me, pulling me away from the counter, away from them. Clara, what's happening? She whispered, her voice laced with protective fury. But I couldn't answer. I could only stare at Leo, who was now subtly turning his back to me, engaging Serafina in a hushed, dismissive conversation, as if I were a bothersome fly he had just swatted away. The sheer disrespect, the casual cruelty of his dismissal, was a new, agonizing layer to the betrayal. It wasn't just that he'd stolen my money and my dream, it was that he had so utterly, completely dehumanized me. He made me feel like nothing, like a transaction, a forgotten detail in his grand scheme. As Sarah steered me towards the exit, I felt 1,000 eyes on me, not just pitying, but judgmental. What did she do? She's making a scene. Poor Leo, what a drama queen. That's how he had framed it, wasn't it? As my irrationality, my spectacle. And in that moment, consumed by shame and shock, I couldn't articulate the truth. The world outside the coffee shop was a merciful blackness, the cool evening air a stark contrast to the burning inferno within me. Sarah and Mark bundled me into Mark's car. The drive home was a silent blur of choked sobs and the muffled comfort of Sarah's hand on my arm. Back in my apartment, not ours anymore, the silence was suffocating. Every corner of the once shared space screamed with his presence, his lies. His art supplies still on the dining table, a half-empty coffee mug by his side of the bed, the faint scent of his cologne clinging to the air. I collapsed onto the couch, the compass pendant still clutched in my hand, now a symbol of grotesque irony. Sarah and Mark stayed, silently making tea, offering tissues, their presence a quiet anchor in my swirling chaos. I don't understand, I finally choked out, my voice raw. He said it was our business. He took my money. All of it. Sarah's eyes hardened. How much, Clara? When I told her the amount, her gasp was audible. Clara, that's your life savings. Did you have anything in writing? My head shook slowly. No. Just his word. Our trust. He said he was handling the lawyers, the paperwork. He said I wouldn't understand the jargon. The realization hit me with fresh, brutal force. I had been so utterly, spectacularly stupid. Naive wasn't even the word. It was willful blindness, a desperate desire to believe in a fairy tale that had turned into a horror story. Mark, ever the practical one, spoke up. "We need to get to a lawyer, Clara. First thing tomorrow. We need to see if there's any way to get your money back." But I felt too numb for practicality. All I could feel was the searing heat of betrayal, the agonizing weight of public humiliation. How could I have been so wrong about someone? How could he have looked me in the eye, day after day, for over a year, and woven such an intricate web of lies? The emotional whiplash was profound. From the peak of joyful anticipation to the deepest trough of despair, all in a matter of minutes. My dream hadn't just died, it had been murdered, publicly, by the man I loved, and then he'd spit on its grave. The pain was so acute, it felt physical, like a shard of glass lodged in my heart, twisting with every beat. And underneath it all, a small, insidious voice whispered, "You deserved this. You were too trusting, too foolish." The days that followed were a bleak, suffocating blur. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The apartment felt like a tomb, each object a painful reminder of a life that was a meticulously crafted lie. My phone buzzed constantly with worried texts from friends and family who had been at the opening, their messages a mix of sympathy and bewilderment. "Are you okay, Clara? What happened with Leo? We saw you leave, looked really intense." Each message was a fresh sting of humiliation, a reminder of my public undoing. I couldn't bring myself to reply. The shame was a thick blanket, smothering me. Sarah and Mark, however, were relentless in their support. They took turns coming over, forcing me to drink water, bringing me food I couldn't swallow. They listened, patiently, as I replayed the scene at the perennial bean over and over, dissecting every word, every gesture, searching for a clue I had missed, a red flag I had ignored. He was always so vague about the details, I'd whisper, my voice hoarse. "Always my lawyer," or "just a formality." And I let him. I just let him. The self-loathing was almost as unbearable as the grief. How could I, a supposedly intelligent woman, a project manager who navigated complex contracts daily, have been so utterly blind? Sarah, ever practical, gently reminded me, "Clara, you loved him. You trusted him. That's not stupidity, that's just being human. He exploited that." Mark, with his quiet strength, kept pushing the lawyer angle. "You have to fight this, Clara. Not just for the money, but for yourself. For justice." The idea of fighting felt overwhelming. I was so broken, so depleted. But as the days crawled by, the numbness began to recede, replaced by a cold, burning ember of anger. The shame was still there, but it was slowly being eclipsed by a fierce, righteous fury. I remembered every casual slight, every gaslighting comment, every time he dismissed my intelligence or my concerns. I remembered the gleam in Serafina's eye, the triumphant smirk. They had planned this. They had orchestrated my humiliation. And the thought ignited something fierce within me. I started small. I found the faded business cards of the few contractors Leo had vaguely mentioned. I cross-referenced the perennial bean business name with public records online. It was a tedious, agonizing process, each discovery a fresh cut. The business was indeed registered, but solely under Leo Maxwell and Serafina Chen. There was no mention of me. Not a single trace. My investment was gone, swallowed whole by their fabricated partnership. It was infuriating, heartbreaking, and terrifying all at once. The realization that I had spent over a year living a lie, loving a ghost, giving my money and my future to a con artist, was a bitter pill to swallow. But with each piece of evidence I uncovered, the fog of despair began to lift, replaced by a chilling clarity. I wasn't just heartbroken, I was a victim of fraud. And something deep inside me, something I hadn't known existed, began to stir. It wasn't about love anymore. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming my dignity. It was about proving to myself, and to them, that I was not a pawn in their game. I was a player, and I was about to make my move. The first meeting with the lawyer, a formidable woman named Ms. Davies, was a watershed moment. I walked in feeling like a crumpled piece of paper, but her no-nonsense demeanor and sharp questions forced me to articulate every painful detail, every lie, every forgotten red flag. I laid out all the evidence I'd painstakingly gathered. Screenshots of texts where he acknowledged my investment, records of the transfers from my account to his, the absence of my name on any public business documents, the original conceptual sketches for the perennial bean that I had created for marketing. Ms. Davies listened, her expression unreadable, occasionally scribbling notes. When I finished, the room was silent. Then, she looked up, her gaze steady. "Ms. Hayes," she said, her voice calm, "this is a clear case of fraudulent misrepresentation and likely theft. It's not going to be easy, but we have a case." The words, theft and fraud, hung in the air, cold and clinical, yet strangely empowering. It wasn't just a messy breakup anymore. It was a crime. And it meant I wasn't just a heartbroken ex-girlfriend, I was a victim seeking justice. That meeting was the turning point. It was the moment I stopped being consumed by shame and started channeling my rage into action. I had spent countless nights reliving the humiliation, dissecting my own stupidity. Now, I began to channel that energy into gathering more evidence, collaborating with Ms. Davies, meticulously piecing together Leo's web of deceit. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about every woman he might have done this to, or every person he would do this to if he wasn't stopped. It was about proving that I wouldn't be silenced, wouldn't be dismissed. My friends, Sarah and Mark, became my unwavering support system. They helped me research, offering moral support, cheering me on when I felt overwhelmed. Sarah, with her background in HR, helped me craft a discreet message to a mutual friend in Leo's freelance community, asking about any past business dealings he might have had. The response was a slow trickle of similar stories, women who had vaguely mentioned investing in Leo's projects that never quite materialized, or who had been mysteriously cut out of deals. His pattern of financial manipulation and emotional exploitation became glaringly obvious. He wasn't just charming, he was a predator. My anger solidified into a quiet, determined resolve. I started going to the gym, not to escape, but to build my strength, both physical and mental. I started eating again, nourishing my body for the fight ahead. I began to reclaim the parts of myself he had tried to diminish, my intelligence, my organizational skills, my resilience. I found myself looking at my apartment, not as a symbol of loss, but as my sanctuary, my base of operations. I purged it of his lingering presence, his clothes, his scattered art supplies, even the specific brand of coffee he liked. Each item removed felt like shedding a layer of the lie, a cleansing ritual. One evening, I saw an Instagram story from a mutual acquaintance. It was a photo of Leo and Serafina, beaming, holding the perennial bean coffee cups, with a caption gushing about their incredible journey. A wave of nausea hit me, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, steely resolve. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They had their public triumph. I would have my justice. And it would be far more satisfying. The path ahead was daunting, but I was no longer stumbling in the dark. I had a direction, a purpose, and a burning desire for retribution that was slowly but surely transforming into a quiet, powerful self-actualization. The discovery of Leo's wider pattern of deception was like unlocking a new level in a grim video game. The mutual friend I'd reached out to, Emily, was hesitant at first. "Leo's always been a bit slippery," she'd said, "but I never thought he'd cross that line." It turned out Emily knew a woman named Chloe, a budding artist who had, a couple of years prior, invested a significant sum in a revolutionary art app Leo was supposedly developing. Chloe had been sweet, a bit naive, and completely enamored with Leo's grandiose visions. The app never materialized, and her money vanished. When she pressed him, he'd gaslight her, claiming she didn't understand the complexities of tech development and that she was the one being unreasonable. Sound familiar? It hit me then, the chilling precision of his methods. He found women who were enthusiastic, who had a little money, and who were eager to believe in a dream. He leveraged their trust, their romantic ideals, and then, when they became inconvenient, he discarded them, making them feel like they were the problem. Chloe's story, then another, and another, slowly began to surface. It wasn't just me. He was a serial con artist, preying on people's hopes and vulnerabilities. The anger I felt was no longer just personal, it was a collective rage, a desire to protect others from his toxic charm. My lawyer, Ms. Davies, was methodical. She helped me compile a dossier, a chilling narrative of Leo's financial and emotional manipulations. We started by sending him a formal legal letter, a demand for repayment, outlining the specific instances of fraud. The response, through his own hastily acquired lawyer, was predictable: denial, counter-accusations, and threats of defamation. He clearly thought I'd back down, that I'd crumble under pressure. He didn't know the new Clara. I took to social media, not to air my dirty laundry, but to subtly connect with others who might have had similar experiences with Leo. I didn't mention him by name at first, but posted vaguely about red flags in relationships and reclaiming your power after betrayal. The response was immediate, a wave of women sharing their own stories of manipulation and financial exploitation, some of them disturbingly similar to mine. One message stood out, from a woman named Vanessa. "Is this about Leo Maxwell?" she asked. My heart leaped. Vanessa had been his girlfriend before me. She detailed a pattern of borrowing money for urgent business opportunities that never materialized, vague promises of shared futures, and then a sudden, brutal breakup when she started asking too many questions. Her story was almost identical to mine, right down to the gaslighting and the public humiliation, though hers was during a family holiday. This was more than just a case, it was a movement. With Ms. Davies' guidance, and with Vanessa's brave willingness to come forward, we began to build a class action lawsuit. It wasn't about revenge, not entirely. It was about systemic justice. It was about making sure Leo Maxwell couldn't do this to anyone else. It was about exposing him for the fraud he was, not just to a few friends, but to the wider world. The fear was still there, the lingering shame, but it was eclipsed by a burgeoning sense of purpose. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of my own justice, and I was building a formidable case. The process was exhausting, emotionally draining, but with each new piece of evidence, each new woman who bravely stepped forward, I felt a renewed surge of strength. I was not alone. We were not alone. And Leo Maxwell's carefully constructed house of cards was about to come crashing down. The legal process was agonizingly slow, a glacial crawl through depositions, discovery, and mediation attempts that went nowhere. Leo, through his lawyer, maintained his innocence, portraying me and the other women as bitter exes or misguided investors who simply didn't understand the risks of entrepreneurship. It was infuriating, but I held on to the cold, hard facts. Our collective testimony, backed by financial records and damning email exchanges, painted a very different picture. The public aspect began to escalate. Emily, the mutual friend who initially connected me to Chloe, bravely came forward with her story, too. She, along with Chloe and Vanessa, agreed to be part of the legal action, amplifying the case's strength. Word started to spread beyond our immediate circles, reaching various online communities focused on exposing predatory behavior. A few smaller blogs and a local news outlet picked up whispers of the ongoing lawsuit against a charming local artist accused of serial financial fraud. They didn't name him directly at first, but the descriptions were unmistakable. The pressure on Leo began to mount. He became increasingly active on social media, posting defensively, trying to salvage his image. He'd share photos of himself hard at work at the perennial bean, looking tired but determined, subtly painting himself as the victim of a coordinated smear campaign. His loyal followers, some still charmed by his facade, defended him vehemently, accusing us of being jealous and vengeful. It was a brutal online war, fought in the comments sections and on private messages. But for every one of his defenders, there were a dozen people who started to connect the dots, to question the man they thought they knew. Sarah, my rock, helped me navigate the online toxicity. Don't engage, Clara, she'd advise. Let the lawyers do their work. The truth will come out. But it was hard. Every false accusation, every dismissive comment about my character, felt like a fresh wound. I had to learn to detach, to remember that their words were merely projections of his lies. The turning point in the public sphere came when a local investigative reporter, intrigued by the whispers, decided to dig deeper. She found Chloe, then Vanessa, then me. We shared our stories, carefully, collaboratively, providing the reporter with the documented evidence Ms. Davies had compiled. The article, when it broke, was scathing. It detailed Leo's modus operandi, the patterns of manipulation, the financial discrepancies, the emotional toll he had taken on multiple women. It didn't explicitly name Serafina, but it heavily implied her complicity, describing her as a new partner who benefited directly from the alleged fraud. The internet, as it does, exploded. The story went viral within hours. Comment sections overflowed with outrage, shared experiences, and calls for justice. People who had admired Leo's art, who had followed his journey, felt personally betrayed. The grand opening of the perennial bean, once a triumphant symbol for Leo and Serafina, was now stained with scandal. Reviews of the coffee shop began to tank, riddled with comments about fraudulent owners and stolen dreams. The shame I had felt that night at the opening began to transmute into a shared public outrage directed squarely at him. It was a powerful, intoxicating feeling, this collective validation. It wasn't just my fight anymore, it was a public reckoning. Leo's online presence went silent. The comments on his posts, once adoring, were now a torrent of condemnation. The tables had turned. He was no longer the charming visionary, he was the exposed con artist. And I, the humiliated ex, was now seen as a courageous survivor, a voice for justice. The fear I had once felt was replaced by a quiet strength. The shame by an undeniable sense of vindication. This wasn't just about winning a lawsuit, it was about reclaiming my narrative, about turning my deepest humiliation into a public lesson. The legal battle culminated in a settlement, rather than a full trial. Ms. Davies had advised it, explaining that a trial would be lengthy, emotionally draining, and financially perilous. The evidence we had amassed, coupled with the relentless media attention, put immense pressure on Leo. His reputation was in tatters, his business floundering under the weight of public condemnation. He was hemorrhaging money on legal fees, and the optics of a full public trial would have been disastrous for him. The settlement wasn't everything I'd lost, but it was substantial, enough to cover my financial losses, and then some, as compensation for emotional distress. It also included a non-disclosure agreement regarding the specific terms, but crucially, it did not prevent me from speaking about my experience of the relationship and betrayal, nor did it stop the other women from pursuing their own actions or speaking out. It was a partial victory, perhaps, but a profound one. It was an acknowledgement, a legal validation, that what he had done was wrong. More than the money, the settlement was a symbol of my reclaimed agency. It was the universe, or perhaps just a very determined lawyer, acknowledging that I had been wronged, and that I deserved recompense. The day the settlement went through, I felt an overwhelming sense of lightness, like a suffocating weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't triumph, not exactly. It was closure. It was the definitive end of the nightmare. The immediate aftermath was still tinged with the lingering pain of what I had lost, but it was overshadowed by a burgeoning sense of freedom. My friends, Sarah and Mark, threw a small, intimate celebration for me. No grand gestures, just quiet companionship, good food, and genuine smiles. "You did it, Clara," Sarah said, raising a glass of sparkling cider. "You got your dignity back." And she was right. That was the real win. I started to rebuild my life, not just financially, but emotionally. I poured myself back into my work, bringing a new focus and determination to my projects. I took on a challenging new assignment that required me to travel, to step out of my comfort zone, to embrace the unknown. Each step felt like an act of defiance against the fear and complacency that had allowed Leo to manipulate me. I went to therapy, not just to process the trauma, but to understand my own vulnerabilities, to learn how to trust my gut, to build healthier boundaries. It was a painful, introspective journey, peeling back layers of old insecurities and misplaced trust. I learned to distinguish between genuine connection and charming manipulation. I learned to value my own worth, not just what I could give, but who I inherently was. I started dating again, tentatively at first, but with a newfound awareness. I was cautious, yes, but not closed off. I looked for authenticity, for consistency, for true partnership, not just grand gestures. I learned to ask the hard questions, to scrutinize words with actions, to trust my intuition when something felt off. The ghost of Leo still haunted me occasionally, a flicker of memory, a fleeting shadow. But he no longer held power over me. He was a painful lesson, a stark reminder of the darkness that can hide beneath the brightest smile. And I, the naive, heartbroken girl, had been reforged in the fires of betrayal. I emerged stronger, wiser, and immeasurably more resilient. The perennial being, his supposed triumph, eventually closed down, unable to recover from the public scandal. A small, almost poetic, vindication. But by then, I was already too far ahead, building my own, true perennial strength, rooted deeply in self-respect and unshakable truth. My life, once defined by his deception, was now defined by my unwavering ability to rise.